Step number one.
It's for the science.
Step number one, clean your PC. Hey PC World fans, Adam here with Will, and about a year and a half ago, we built Will this custom gaming rig, but since then, you've had some problems, right?
Yeah, it's been a little bit up and down. During normal work, it's usually pretty stable, but during high load situations, it's often crashy and in inexplicable ways.
Oh, that sucks. That sucks, especially when you have hardware problems. Well, that's what we kind of want to get into in this video. Their goal is twofold. Number one, we obviously want to fix your machine so that it's running fine,
that sounds great.
Smooth. But number two, I thought it might be interesting to show some of the troubleshooting steps that we would go through when trying to fix some of this stuff. And everyone's got different rigs, different hardware configurations, different problems with their scenario. But I think a lot of these troubleshooting metrics apply to everybody, right?
It turns out troubleshooting theory is always kind of the same across all systems. You always start with the stuff that's easiest to test, and then you go to the more complicated, more expensive solutions. And we're going to walk through the process based on what we have here and what's set up in the machine right now.
Yeah, let's dig in. All right, so first up, let's go over your rig and the problems that you're having specifically. So tell me about the hardware you have in here right now.
So it's a 13900K running more or less stock, except for, of course, the memory. I'm running overclocked DDR5 6000,
okay.
64 gigs of G.Skill RAM.
Okay.
There's a 4090. It's an ASUS Maximus Z790 Apex. Those words might not be in the right order.
High-end motherboard.
But it's a high-end motherboard, kind of designed for overclocking, which was frankly overkill, but it was white, and I wanted to, white on white on white.
It was cool.
And then there's 3 or 4 SSDs in there. They're all M2 SSDs.
Okay, and so you mentioned Fortnite, but specifically, what's the issue that you're seeing?
So I started seeing crashes in games that used anti-cheat technology. Fortnite was the one that it happened most commonly because I do play a lot of Fortnite. And what was happening was Easy Anti-Cheat was crashing silently. It wasn't leaving a crash dump in the game folder. It wasn't offering to do a crash report. When you looked at the logs, it just said, hey, we've detected a problem and stopped the game. And when I talked to friends who work in the game industry and worked on anti-cheat stuff in the past, they seemed to think that that probably meant that Easy Anti-Cheat was detecting changes in memory that weren't being written by the game. So, potential memory corruption issues.
Interesting. Okay, but on the other hand, we have seen some recent reports of high-end Intel CPUs having some of these same issues, correct?
Yeah, so there's a technology called Oodle that's used to kind of package game assets, and in part of the unpackaging, assets were getting corrupted on a lot of these machines, and to the point that Rad Game Tools, which makes Oodle, has a FAQ page up that's like, hey, if you have a 13900K, 1400K, and you're seeing these kinds of errors, here's some stuff you can do to potentially fix the problem. Now, interestingly, that just came up a couple weeks ago now. I had independently gotten to pretty much their recommended settings and had a stable configuration that actually works, but it required me to run at Intel fail-safes for the SVID, turn off ASUS multi-core enhancements in the UEFI, and then actually clock down the maximum multiplier for the CPU from 55, which is what it ships with, to 52 using the Intel Extreme Tuning utility.
Okay, so you've been able to get it to run stable, but obviously you're kind of like taking away some of the performance.
Well, and honestly, I'm a little worried about degradation in the long term, right? When you start seeing things that require you to clock down, I wonder if I'm sitting on a ticking time bomb here, right? So.
Yeah.
That combined with the Oodle stuff that we're seeing wider reports of these 13900K problems, it seems like it'd be interesting to come in and kind of dig in and see what the actual problem is on this machine as a representative example.
Okay, and so some of the first steps, I think, for both of us are usually software related. Hey, did you update your drivers?
Updated drivers, updated Intel Management Engine.
Okay.
Running a current BIOS as of like a month ago.
Okay.
Ran with nothing running in the background?
Yeah, so sometimes we'll get crashes because a certain utility is running in the background is like it's having a conflict with the game. So we did kind of test that. So the next step after making sure none of those things were a problem is typically at that point I'd say, well, why not just reinstall the OS? At least take that variable out. But it's kind of not an option here.
Well, when you're looking at the troubleshooting theory, you start with the easy stuff and go to the hard stuff. And for a normal gaming machine, reinstalling Windows is a fairly straightforward task. since I also use this for development and other things, I have dev environments on there that are fairly time consuming to set back up. So it's like instead of it being a couple hours, it's a day or two of resetting up that I'd like to avoid if at all possible. So I did things like run SFC scan now to make sure I didn't have any corrupt files. I did, ran ScanDisk on the SSDs to make sure there's no corruption. Uninstalled and reinstalled Fortnite, clean installed drivers, all of the kind of common things you do up to the OS reinstall. I also did stuff like go in and reset the BIOS to defaults, turning off back to the Intel failsafe, not running the overclocked memory and the overclocked profiles, and we still saw problems. They were different problems, but they were problems indicating stability issues.
Okay, so I feel confident that we've kind of exhausted most of the software-related fixes, except for the OS, but we're going to kind of put that off later. So I think one of the lucky things we have here at the lab is that we have a lot of hardware that we can kind of throw in here, and that's what we want to do now is go through step by step and isolate different variables and kind of swap it out and see if we have the same problem. So the steps that we're going to take, once again, go from kind of easiest to more difficult. First up, we're gonna switch out the RAM, because it could be the RAM. If that doesn't fix, then we're going to move to the power supply, because while you do have a fairly good power supply in there, it's also just another variable to maybe have a little bit more overhead and try to negate some spikes if any of that's happening.
Well, and it's at the low end of the recommendation for the 13900K and the 4090 pair.
Got it.
Especially with a lot of RAM and a bunch of SSDs.
Got it. And then after that, we're going to move to switching to a different CPU, because even though maybe it's memory related, it still might have the same problem with a different pair of sticks, because maybe it's the memory controller in the CPU itself. So we're going to do that. And then the last two, which are going to take a little bit longer, but I think then it would make more sense to try to reinstall the OS. And then after that, a motherboard. We're essentially talking about just kind of rebuilding a new system at that point if we can't figure it out. But hopefully we can get to it at one of these earlier steps.
That's my hope. I mean, hopefully there's not something endemic wrong with me that's causing this problem.
I hope so. I hope so, because I don't know how to troubleshoot you. I'm not a therapist, so.
No, I'm the problem. It's me.
Yeah,
that's
there
all
you
I
go.
know.
All right. Well, first up, I'd say let's launch Fortnite in the default state and just show people how it crashes.
You want to see the crash? Okay.
So yeah, let's launch Fortnite. So one of the fixes is to go into Extreme Tuning Utility and clock down the P cores, correct?
Performance core, the maximum P core ratio from 55 to 52.
And you found that that's the most stable. You still had problems at 53?
53, I had occasional problems. 52, I haven't had any issues at all.
Okay, well now with that in place, let's try running some Fortnite and see if it crashes.
So we're on the loading island here. Typically this is fine. Sometimes it crashes at this point. But we're going to warp over to the bus. We're going to, of course, thank the bus driver. We always thank the bus driver. And then typically we crash sometime between the time we jump out of the plane and when we land.
This is the max P core frequency, which is running at 5.2 gigahertz. The voltage, before it was running at 1.6, now we're showing 1.5. The TDP, and then the package temperature, which is hanging in the mid to higher 80s right now. So let's see if it crashes. All right, so we ran a couple minutes of Fortnite. It's obviously stable. This is kind of what you've been doing at home. Once again, we've also seen a scenario where running the RAM at JEDEC speeds, it's able to be more stable, but we were still experiencing crashes.
Blue screens, weird crashes after you shut down the game, stuff like that. So it's not quite as predictable as this scenario, but it's still unstable even at the stock, even with everything running at stock. All the ASUS multi-core enhancements turned off, the AI speed boost, the SVID set to Intel failsafe defaults. Basically, as stock as you can make this motherboard, still is unstable.
Okay, well, next up, let's start swapping around some hardware. First, let's start with some RAM. And the fine folks over at Patriot have sent over a couple kits of Viper Gaming. One of them is 64 gigs of DDR5 at 6,400 megatransfers per second. The other one is 96 gigs DDR5 at 6,000 megatransfers per second. So we're going to swap in one of these and hopefully see if maybe just the RAM is the problem here.
So if you're at home, you don't have extra RAM kits laying around. One of the things, and I've already done this at home, we know that this didn't work. You can shut down your machine, turn it all the way off at the power supply, discharge all the electricity by pressing the power button again. and then pop out one stick at a time and try one stick at a time. So
Right.
if you have odds are, if you have bad memory, you're not going to have 2 bad sticks, you're going to have 1 bad stick. So
Exactly, yeah.
you can hopefully isolate that without having to go out and get a spare set of RAM.
Okay, with that in mind, let's swap in some RAM. So you shut down the machine, you discharge the power. Now you're gonna pop out the sticks. I will say, now that the panel's open, you got a little dust in here, but really, I kind of have a question.
Don't be hating.
What the hell? Oh my
Okay,
God,
so
Will.
look, I took it off this morning. It sits under my desk normally. I looked at it and I was like, oh man, I should have dusted this, but I'm gonna leave this on so Adam has something to yell at me for. So you're welcome. I did it for the content.
Thank you. I mean, though, to be fair, the other way to look at it is that, hey, the actual fine mesh on here is doing its job, because if you look at the blades behind here, it's actually not that dusty.
Look, so we have 2 layers of mesh. Both are catching a fair amount of dust.
Yeah.
But inside, it's just the thinnest layer. So
All right. Well,
we'll clean this off before we put it back.
That aside, let's swap in some RAM. And these ones are particularly pokey. We got some G.Skill, what is that, Trident Z?
This is Trident Z DDR5 6000, I believe.
Okay.
It's 64 gigs, so each stick is 32 gigs.
Now let's put in our Patriot Viper Elite 5.
Is it Elite because it has SICK RGB on it?
It's got SICK RGB, which is going to make your game run faster.
I mean, look, I will tell you, when the RAM wasn't all the way seated, we knew it because the RGB didn't light up. So RGB does work.
It helps with troubleshooting. Another nice little tip is I have yet to come across a stick of DDR5 where the orientation, the correct orientation into the motherboard, is the label side towards the CPU. So I don't know if that holds true for everywhere, but so far that's a good trick to know the orientation.
Probably the only way the CPU can know what speed the memory is.
Exactly, it's got to look at it. All right, let's boot it up. So because we stuck in some new RAM, it's probably going to have to go through some memory training.
Then I have to jump into the UFI.
Yeah, jam on that delete. Hit it. Hit it. All right, upon first boot, it's going to do some memory training. Will is jamming on the delete key to make sure we can get into the UEFI.
Here we go.
It might reboot a couple times, but we will see. All right.
We're in the UFI.
And we're going to go over to the Extreme Tuner, and look, it already picked XMP1 for us.
It's a little bit lower voltage than the other memory was, too. So.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, 1.35 instead of 1.4.
Yeah.
All right, so we're back in. XTU is set to the defaults, which is the 5.5 gigahertz. We have an update to BattlEye, which usually it crashes.
This failed pretty consistently at 55X.
Yeah, so this is kind of our
It worked.
first signal. Oh, it worked. Okay. Let's see once we're in the game, if we can get there.
Okay, so we're in the desktop. I mean, in the lobby. Typically, the lobby's okay.
All right, so I did throw the side panel and the front panel back on, dust and all, just to keep it a little consistent. And we are seeing the package temperature around the same, maybe a little bit lower. TDP, core voltage 1.6, drops down to 1.5 here and there, and the max turbo frequency at 5.5 gigahertz. And so far, it's stable.
Seems okay so far. This is further than I've gotten at a 55x multiplier in like recent memory. I'm going to keep playing for a minute. It has been crashy at this point before. Ooh, that's a big micro stutter.
Yeah,
there.
what the hell was that?
I don't know how you call that a micro stutter. That's
Yeah, that was a
macro
macro stutter. Gonna start shrinking.
Oh, I crashed.
Oh, okay. Oh, there we go. We got a crash.
Okay, so let's see which crash this is.
So we're gonna go into the logs to double check the crash type that we got in here.
And up, here we go, smoking gun.
Okay, so we can confirm that we're still getting that OODLE decompressed shader group error.
The error is could not decompress shader group with the OODLE group index, and then that number changes. But the idea is it's trying to decompress shaders from a compressed bundle, and they come out corrupt, and then that crashes the game. Well, I thought this was going to be a short video, Adam.
Unfortunately, it is not. We're gonna be here for a little bit because just swapping out the RAM didn't do it. I mean, what are the chances that this stick of RAM could also have corruptions as well?
I mean, it could.
Could.
But I would assume we could swap out for another one. We could run the test again.
It's true.
I kind of think we should move on to the next step at this
I mean,
point.
I will say it did last longer before it crashed, though.
It did.
Like, you were able to actually play a couple minutes of the game before the crash.
I almost killed Peter.
So yeah, I do wonder if that is an indication. Maybe this stick of RAM was able to hold voltages a little higher for longer. I'm not quite sure, but yeah.
I think we can safely rule out RAM as an overarching possibility. At this
All right. So next up, we're going to go to power supply because even though we feel like if it truly was a power supply problem, like either a problem with the power supply or major spikes that are hitting that power supply, you'd probably get like a blue screen, or like the whole system would kind of shut down, not just the application, right?
Well, so the interesting thing is, running at full speed with JEDEC, we were seeing whole system reboots, black screens.
True.
Which to me puts a question mark on power supply. Now, that OODLE error in Unreal is making me kind of think CPU.
All right, so our friends over at Silverstone have sent over a Hella 1200R Platinum, which is the same make and model that you have, just a higher wattage to take out any of those spikes. Obviously, it's a newer power supply too, so maybe there's a chance you've been running it hard for a while and there's some problems.
And again, the thought is 13900K, 4090, both power hungry. 4 SSDs, all pretty good size PCIe 4, PCIe 5 SSDs, and 64 to 96 gigs of memory. Yep. It's a lot of potential power draw. So we'll put the bigger power supply in and see if that does anything.
One thing to note, we're just going to swap out the unit itself and keep the wiring in there. We can do that because this is literally the same make and model. This is not always going to be the case. Don't assume that you can take a Corsair power supply and swap in the EVGA one.
You can't do that. Don't do that.
The pinout is not always the same, but luckily in this case we have the same.
It's why we got this power supply.
Exactly, yeah. So let's open it up and switch it out.
Spin it around. I don't want any judgment about the state of the wires back here. It's a tight space.
Oh, you know what? Actually, it's not that bad.
Actually is the part that makes me feel bad, just to be clear.
It's actually not. I mean, for as little space that there is in here, I don't necessarily think I could do better, but maybe spend a little more time with it.
There's a lot of fans. There's a lot of RGB stuff. I had to put an RGB controller in here so I could get the effects that I wanted.
Right.
Well, speed matters.
I was worried a little bit about swapping out the power supply.
It's not going to be great. I'm going to go ahead and tell you in advance.
Yeah.
It's good.
I thought that might be easier because we're using the same exact unit, but
it's good. I'm going to just say it's good that we're using the same exact unit.
Yeah, but it's still going to be a little bit of a pain.
Glad this was on your side, not mine, if I'm being honest. Oh no, there's stuff threaded through here.
All right, so we got the new power supply in. I will note that this newer power supply had a different sense pin layout than the old one. This one was 4-pin, the new one was 6-pin, so we did have to run the new 24-pin power with the new unit. Other than that, we used the same cables for the rest of them.
If we had learned that before we had taken the other power supply out and disconnected everything, I probably would have moved this further down the order of operations, just because it's a little more complicated. But
also,
oh well.
So the other thing I want to note too is what happens if somebody doesn't have a secondary power supply? I mean, should somebody just run out and have a second power supply on hand?
So I actually do often keep a second power supply around. It's usually not a bigger power supply than the one I'm using in my main machine, which in this case is what we're kind of looking at. But I do keep spare power supplies because they do tend to conk out. And if, for example, you see a lot of black screens in the summertime when it's warm and when your computer room is warm, that's often because the power supply is reaching the end of its life and it's able to provide the power you need during the cool months. But as the temperature goes up, the efficiency goes down, and those black screens indicate that you're probably looking at a new power supply soon.
Okay, well, we got the new power supply in. Let's boot it up and see if that solved our issue. All right, new power supply in. We have the CPU tuning the exact same. Let's launch Fortnite and see what happens.
That's a serious game for oh, whoa.
Whoa! Whoa! All right.
Hi-yo!
Okay. Yeah. And it crashed.
So here we go. BattlEye launcher. Updating. Will the game launch?
Nope. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So, honestly, I don't think we need to go into the game. Like, I feel like.
Seems like there's something wrong.
Yeah, this is the same problem. I don't think the power supply was going to fix anything, but it at least takes a part out. So now. Let's move over to a CPU. I do have a couple CPUs on hand, but I think first up, let's try the 13900KS. The thought being is that it's obviously similar to your 13900K in there, but the KS ones are special binned units, so you would think that these are kind of the best of the silicon lottery out there, right?
Because the OODL era specifically calls out a limited small number of 13900s. And I don't think we have another 13900. This is only
Not
1300.
specifically, yeah. I've got 1300 KS, so yeah, let's pop it in. So now with the cooler off, I'm reminded that we actually use the Thermal Right anti-bending frame on the CPU here. So I know if Gordon were here, he'd say, "What the hell? There's your problem." Which technically, if you clamp that thing down too tight, you do have problems with RAM. Now that I think about it, I think we should loosen it just a little bit, or like reinstall it, add some new thermal paste, and fire it back up again.
With this CPU?
With this CPU,
Yeah.
yeah. So let's do that. So the patented technique I learned from Tech Jesus himself is to just pinch it with 2 fingers. Only use the resistance of 2 fingers.
What if you have 2 really strong, incredibly thick fingers?
Not me. It's not enough, Will. Just really
You're not
dump
even
it on
looking.
there.
How do you know?
I can tell.
This is
You're
too
somebody who
much.
doesn't put enough.
You can never have too much.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm going to kind of smear it around a little bit there. Leave your angry comments. Send them to Adam Patrick Murray at PCWorld.com. Like you're putting them there. Set me up to fail, so when they fall in,
Dink.
I'm the problem.
You know, I did forget that. Yeah, that was one of the reasons why we picked this, because it has a white PCB.
Yeah, I said,
It was pretty rare.
give me the white PCB, and you said there aren't really that many cases with a white PCB, and I said, well, you said, tell me your dreams, Will.
Tell me your dreams.
And I said,
I will make them a reality.
I would like a white PCB. I've always wanted an all-white computer with all-white cables to match the modern millennial aesthetic of which I'm not a part.
Yeah.
Airflow reasons. It's going great.
So instead of reinstalling that Thermal Right and anti-bending bracket, we actually put the original ILM back on, cleaned off the CPU, and put on some new thermal paste. So we're going to try that as just kind of a mid-step. I mean, I think sometimes that's good when you're troubleshooting things to be able to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to continue to change one little variable rather than us doing the bending bracket and the CPU at the same time.
It's best to isolate as many variables as possible.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's launch the game again and see if that changed anything. Oh, all right, well, yeah, okay.
This is the right Fortnite game log, and it's the same thing.
Yeah,
Little
same
compression.
thing. All right. Now let's swap the CPU.
Let's see, I'm lining up my corners.
No.
There's the triangle, there's the triangle. Doodaloo-doo, doodaloo-doo-doo. There we go.
All right, some more
Time to
paste.
goo.
Goo it up.
Trust me.
You've got enough.
We're good. Okay.
Doodaloo-doo. Doodaloo-doo-doo.
Oh yeah, it's not going anywhere.
13900 KS. XMP1. MCE
Auto.
disabled. SVID behavior Intel failsafe.
No changes to settings.
Yep. All right, we've loaded up the 13900 KS. Loading into Fortnite now. Intel XTU is defaulting to 5.6 gigahertz because the KS has an extra little overclock. Rather than go down to 5.5 like the stock 13900K, we're going to keep it stock for the KS, so a little bit faster, and we're going to keep an eye on the same metrics. But so far so good. No crashes. Let's see.
Launched right in, no problems with the BattleEye or Easy Anti-Cheat.
Yep. Yeah, so I will say this 1300 KS, that is a toasty part. So far, the liquid temperature is doable, but I don't think we're actually going to run into any problems because of the heat here.
Is the S short for smoking?
Smoking, yeah. I mean, we got the same voltage. TDP is definitely pushing, but hey, maybe that also means that the voltage is going to be a little bit more stable.
I think we cap at 235 on the 13900K on default settings. Is that right?
But it definitely wasn't maintaining over 230 like this. Either way you landed, no
No crashes so
No
far.
crashes
we're
yet.
We're not out of the danger window
We're
here.
not out of the
I played
danger
for
zone.
5 or 6 minutes on a previous round.
All right, so we've been playing for a while. I have been watching the stats here. We are hitting 100C on the package temperature, which theoretically is within Intel spec. That's fine. Two things though. I do think it's a KS part, so it is defaulting to 5.6, so a little bit faster. Also, we switched from the anti-bending frame to the stock ILM, so that's also probably why the package temperature is increasing a little bit. But the TDP, I mean, it's holding pretty steady. Below 230. The voltage, it's fluctuating between 1.4 and 1.6, depending on what he's doing. And then, the max frequency, I've seen it as low as 5.2, but it can get up to 5.5. We are getting throttled a little bit by the CPU temps, but either way, I mean, it's holding steady. So far, we have swapped out the RAM, swapped out the power supply, swapped out the
CPU,
the anti-bending frame with the stock ILM, and now we've swapped out the CPU.
Yeah,
and the CPU swap
the problem.
Seems to fix the problem at this point. I think before we call it, I think one of the things that we can do just to double check is throw your old sticks of RAM back in. And kind of almost return it to the state that it was in, just to say, hey, you know what? It's just the CPU. So
let's see. Let's absolutely confirm.
Yeah, let's do that.
Them bones.
Dropping in the RAM. Dropping in. Oh boy, those G skills are sharp.
Well, look, we had to leave the dust on so that we knew if it was an airflow problem. Okay.
Over time, we've rubbed the dust away, which has
I'm going to rub your dust away.
So what we did is throw in the original G-Skill RAM with this 13900KS, just to kind of see if it's the CPU, the RAM, kind of almost setting it back to the way that we found it, just to control some of the variables, just for fun. This isn't a necessary step, but I'm just curious to see.
Well, because you don't want to replace the hardware you don't have to replace, right?
Exactly, yeah.
The other thing, the last piece to swap out is the CPU frame. Is still, we're using the default ITU, not the Thermalright CPU frame.
Hey!
Nice!
Yeah, nice!
When I came in here and said, hey, Fortnite's crashing my computer and I think it's a bad CPU, everybody was like, oh, you're crazy. And then a few weeks later, people are like, oh, there's an OODLE memory problem. And guess what? Suddenly, who's the crazy one now?
All right, well, we don't know for sure. All indications are pointing to swapping out the CPU has seemed to fix it. I think, once again, we've swapped the memory. We've swapped out the ILM back to the stock ILM. We've swapped out the power supply, and we swapped out the CPU. The CPU has seemed to hold up the test of time, even with the original memory.
And even with the two-slot, the two-fan radiator, the smaller radiator that you would typically put on the 1300 KS.
Yeah, but at least I think it'll help us understand what the problem is, and we can go, from there, what we want to do. Yeah, probably RMA the original CPU, something like that. So we will be back in a week. All right, and we are back after a week. You've taken the rig home, done some testing in normal conditions. Not only that, you have also swapped back the original power supply, the original RAM, and the original anti-bending frame.
We put that frame back in.
Back on it.
Finger tight.
All right, so how has it been then?
Rock solid.
Wow. I mean, that's
100%. No blue screens, no crashes, no weird jankiness. No applications freezing and then coming back to life. None of the weird stuff that has been happening for the last 6 to 8 months happened.
Okay, so then, I mean, I think at this point, we can call it, hey, it was a problem with the CPU.
I'm prepared to point a finger, and I'm pointing it right at a 13900K right back there on the table.
Okay, all right. So I'm glad we figured that out. But before we end up this video, I think we kind of want to go over some, recap the best practices for troubleshooting. Because obviously we stepped through some here, and there are other ways and problems that people run into, but generally there are some good troubleshooting tips, right?
Well, okay, so there's some basic guidelines that you can just always know, right? If it's warmer than usual in your room and you suddenly start seeing black screen reboots, that probably means your power supply doesn't like the new temperature.
I would look there first.
Look there first. Maybe blow out some dust, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I don't see.
I cleaned off the front.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, the dust is looking a lot better this
I
time.
left the dust because I was afraid the dust might actually be the problem because it was, impacting airflow.
Okay.
Okay. So black screen reboots power supply, blue screens, crashes, unexplained weirdness. Like, look at your RAM first.
Yeah.
That's the easiest thing to swap out probably in your computer.
Probably.
You just pop this, unplug the power, discharge the motherboard, pop the sticks out, put some new sticks in.
Or run one stick at a time,
Or-
or clock it down if you have XMP or technically an overclock.
Although it's worth mentioning that clocking the RAM down didn't actually help when I had the 7600 earlier on. So
True.
RAM next. If you have further problems past there, like if you're having hard drive corruption, if you're running SFC scan now on Windows and you're getting a lot of corruption often without a bunch of blue screens, maybe look at your storage. SSDs can be pretty reliable, but they still do occasionally fail.
And they do heat up.
And they do heat up,
Yeah.
which can cause problems. So then if you get through that point and you're still having problems, if you've done all that stuff, looked at all that, you're still having issues, it's time to look at the CPU. Traditionally, CPUs have been pretty reliable. This is the third one now that's been in the system in the last year and a half. So, it's a weird time for the semiconductor industry coming out of the pandemic. Some stuff that used to be really rock solid, maybe less so, I think. But the RMA process for Intel, at least, which I have some experience with, was really painless and was like a 3-day turn on the CPU.
Also, we're seeing motherboard manufacturers are pushing the limits of the speed. So if you are worried about that, especially stability or degradation over time, things like that, turning off multi-core enhancements, anything that the motherboard is going to add to kind of get the most power out of it. Sometimes it's actually better to sacrifice just a little bit of that for more stability.
I'm going to go ahead and tell you, turning off ASUS, so this is an ASUS Sports, we're going to pick on ASUS, but Gigabyte, MSI, everybody does the same thing, and there's different names for all of them. There's a couple of good articles out there that explain the breakdown of those, and I think we probably can chuck the link in that in the description. But the point is, if you turn that stuff off, the big change that I noticed was that I wasn't spiking the CPU at 100C all the time. It was just going up to like 95, 96, maybe an occasional spike to 100, and then it immediately dipped back down. And the performance impact was negligible. Sure, the bar is a little bit smaller, but I think this is maybe the one case where the bigger bar isn't better.
True. Other things, drivers. Obviously, don't always just rely on Windows to download the latest drivers. Either maybe sometimes it's an older driver, or they're just not going to download a driver at all. And especially very specific things like an Intel management engine. Windows Update is not going to pull that down. You have to pull that manually, and that is very important. Especially if you're upgrading a CPU, anything like that.
Absolutely. So the other thing is, think about your OS. If you're talking about a gaming machine, then it's relatively easy to rebuild after that. If you're talking about a complicated developer environment or something like that, that's a hard rebuild. Reinstalling Windows can be a multi-day pain and take you out of work, and there's consequences to that. But if you're just playing games and you have your games on your D drive, it's pretty easy to clean install Windows, reinstall your drivers, plug Steam in, point it at your D drive, and you're good. You're back in business in no time.
And honestly, I think a lot of people might scoff at this, but I'm a firm believer in reinstall your OS every 6 to 12 months anyway.
See, I do it every 6 to 12 years, whether you need it or not. So, but if you can't install it, then you can always do SFC scan now, which is a really good tool.
Yep.
It basically checks all the core system files, makes sure there's nothing weird or changed, and replaces them with stock known goods.
True.
So
Some good troubleshooting methods. I think for your system specifically, obviously that 13900K you've had a problem with. We are going to take that CPU specifically and maybe run some more tests on it, see what exactly is wrong with it. So be sure to subscribe, for that follow-up coverage. But I think that kind of about wraps it up for this one, right?
yeah, and if people have questions about troubleshooting stuff, please post comments. I'll definitely be in the
sure.
comments checking and answering questions about what you would approach for different kinds of problems. We obviously can't hit everything here. This is just an example of the kind of the matrix we went through
Yep.
troubleshooting my unique problem. And the bad thing is every problem is unique and different.
Yeah,
So.
it's true. Well, hopefully some of this helped you. I'm glad we've helped you.
I'm
now
thrilled.
this makes me feel a lot better about the system that we built for you. It is at least now in a stable environment. So.
It is
For now.
sitting under my desk, just humming along nicely. The Fortnites, the Hell Dives, it all is working great. So
Good.
Yeah,
Good.
thanks.
All right. Well, hopefully this video is working great for you. Be sure to subscribe for the next one that's coming up. Until then, thank you, Will. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.